Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we are back in the Reserve Basin at the former Philadelphia Navy Yard for another episode of Naval News. Unfortunately, earlier this week we got the word that the Oliver Hazard Perry class frigate USS HALYBURTON is not going to be turned into a museum ship anytime soon. HALYBURTON is directly behind me here. She is one of 7 Perry-class frigates that has not been towed out of the Reserve Basin and expended so far. She is the inboardmost of these 5 Perrys that are nested together here. A nonprofit called the Oliver Hazard Perry Shipyard has been working for a couple of years now to save HALYBURTON and take her to Erie, Pennsylvania to open as a museum ship. If saved, she would be the only example of a Perry-class frigate saved, and really one of the most modern museum ships in the United States. In terms of warships, you have a few of us that were operated into the 90s, like the 4 Iowa-class battleships, Midway and Lexington, and the submarine Dolphin, but by and large, all of our existing museum ships are World War II service ships or ships that were designed during World War II. So this Perry-class ship would have been pretty much the nearest thing to a contemporary warship that would have been preserved. On November 25th, 2024, however, the Oliver Hazard Perry Shipyard released that they had not passed the Phase 2 application process to receive the ship, and their efforts to save HALYBURTON are likely going to come to nothing. So for today's video, we wanted to talk a little bit about what that means. We don't have any insider information on the efforts to get this ship, but there is some publicly available information out there on NAVSEA's website. There will be a link to that down below, where they talk about the criteria for ships being turned into museum ships, and they talk about the application process. It's worth pointing out that the application process is a relatively new thing. In the early days of museum ships, and it's real important to remember that the Battleship Texas, turned into a museum in 1948, is the first permanently operating museum ship. So like prior to 1948, the concept of museum ships being operated by nonprofits essentially doesn't exist. You have ships like Victory and Constitution that are still being operated by the Navy, and they're kept as partly for their historic value, but they're not necessarily museums, and they're certainly not being operated by nonprofits. They're still being operated with the full funding of a federal government. So Texas starts this process, and really in the early days, the first several decades of the modern museum ship concept, all you needed was a bunch of school kids to donate their pennies, and you go to the Navy and they basically take you down to a reserve basin and say, go ahead, city of whatever, pick out whichever ship you like. It is cheaper for us to give you the vessel than it is for us to scrap it. And you guys are basically doing free advertising for us. So that's where we get a lot of the early museum ships. The Navy is going to dispose of them. Cities, states, other municipalities, nonprofits step forward and they say, hey, we want to save our namesake ship, or we want to save a ship. Maybe it's an example of a ship that was built here. Maybe it's just like, hey, we have this idea, we want to preserve a submarine or a destroyer or something like that. And usually there was significantly less in the way of application processes and contracts. However, some of these organizations did not have effective business plans, and when the early folks who were operating these ships aged out, they didn't necessarily have more members stepping in, they didn't necessarily have enough money to do capital projects to maintain the ships long term. And at a certain point, nonprofits started contacting the Navy to return their ships because they couldn't maintain them anymore. And this was probably, I can imagine, this was a wake-up moment for the Navy. The Navy has to budget money to dispose of vessels. So if a nonprofit is just like, hey, per our contract, we are no longer able to do this, come and take it, or we're gonna bring it back to you and then you have to dispose of it. And the Navy's like, wait. It costs us money to come and take it. It costs us money to hold the ship in a reserve basin like this. It costs us money to do another application process to get the ship rehomed, or it costs us money to remediate, to scrap the ship. We don't have the budget for that. We thought when we were giving these to museums that this was final disposal. We were never going to have to see these ships again. So when that happens, that sort of ruins it for everyone. And at this point, a couple of museum ships get transferred back, and the Navy has to be more responsible with giving their ships out. So they come up with, and I would say it probably gets more and more complex over the last couple of decades, but they come up with an application process where you have to fill out plans in multiple stages that get reviewed by Navy professionals before they approve a ship to be turned over to a nonprofit. So the way that the system currently works, and interestingly, our tie-in back to New Jersey, this current donation system started with New Jersey. New Jersey is the first ship to go through this three-phase system. And some of the stuff they look for might be a little bit different than our application. But really, in 1999, when multiple nonprofits in the state of New Jersey are applying to get the Battleship, that is the first time that the Navy is using this application system. So you've got 3 tiers. These are the sorts of tiers that the folks in Erie would have had to work their way through. The first phase is to submit a letter of intent and executive summary. I'm not entirely sure. The Navy has criteria for ships being historically significant to turn over to museums. So I'm not sure if they wait for somebody to submit a letter of intent and then they put a ship on donation hold, or if they put a ship on donation hold and then solicit letters of intent from organizations that would want to take this ship that they have deemed historically significant. The way I understand it, and this might just be guesswork on my part, is that Halliburton was on donation hold because she was the most intact of all the Perry-class frigates. Now, many of these still operate in foreign navies, so foreign navies come over to the reserve basin here and take parts off of these ships. And some of them have had their gas turbines gutted for whatever reason as part of their disposal process. So the way I understand it, Halliburton doesn't meet the normal criteria of being lead ship of her class or having a President's Serval on her, a Medal of Honor recipient, something like super historically significant that sets her head and shoulders above other ships. She was just the most intact, the most capable of being taken from that class and turned into a museum. So the shipyard, the Oliver Hazard Perry shipyard would have submitted their letter of intent, and then they had a period of time to go through this, and then there is a second stage that they were working on. Phase 2 is a business financial plan and an environmental study. So they had 12 months to go through the application process and submit things, and that's going to be basically like, hey, do we have an agreement with our town to moor this ship here? Like, do we have a place to put her? Does that place have the facilities that she needs? There will be some remediation required. Do you have a plan to deal with that? You have to do a economic impact study to see, are you going to get enough visitation? Are you going to be raising enough money to preserve this ship for the long-term costs of these ships? And fortunately, we have been operating museum ships long enough now that we have ideas of what these costs are, way more so than the early days when it was like, hey, every fourth grader in the state gave us a penny and we're going to make that work somehow. This is the stage that the Perry Shipyard folks made it to, and there's a link in the description below to their press release where they say that the reasons for the Navy's decision include having additional funding on hand, the first 5 years of operating expenditures, and a long-term lease with the Port Authority where they wanted to dock the ship. So it comes down to, did they have as much money and a place to put the ship as the Navy wanted to see? Had they made it past this stage, the next stage would have been phase 3, which is a review of their mooring, towing, maintenance, and curatorial plans. So assuming that they've got the money that they need to have, they've got a place to put the ship, now the Navy needs to see business plans, operating plans, how are you going to preserve artifacts, how are you going to get the ship here? And at the end of that roughly year-long application process, then If that is successfully completed, then the ship gets turned over. The application is reviewed by a number of experts within the Navy, and different aspects of the plan are reviewed by different experts. For example, our friends at Naval History and Heritage Command would be the ones reviewing the curatorial and museum plans when the ship gets to that stage. There's a comptroller that would be reviewing the business plans and that sort of stuff. There's a lawyer that would be reviewing the agreements that they would have with the port where they're going to dock the ship, and the city and town council, whatever other organizations or stakeholders in this. So all this is to say that this is a significantly more difficult process now than it was before. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it is really unfortunate that we aren't seeing one of the Perrys preserved. We aren't seeing more ships saved like this. Halyburton, to my knowledge, was the only ship currently on donation hold. Plans to turn John F. Kennedy into a museum fell through. Plans to turn Charles F. Adams into a museum fell through, and now plans to turn Halyburton into a museum have fallen through. The organizations have not been able to meet the criteria recently. So your most recent museum ship that the Navy has turned over, I believe, remains Iowa back in 2012. So who knows at this point if and when we'll ever see a new museum ship created. Definitely stay tuned on the channel as we hear about new efforts. We'll talk about them in future naval news segments so that you guys can tell about it. And remember to check out your existing museum ships, because saving the ones we have may be the only options that we have at this point. To find your local museum ships, go to museumships.us, which is a list of all museum ships around the world, or check out hinsa.org, which looks more at museum warships. What kind of ship do you think would make a cool new museum ship if an organization forms to get one? Let us know in the comment section down below. I've always wanted to see an Arleigh Burke destroyer turn into a museum ship when they start being retired in a couple of decades. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support, and there's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about the channel and the museum. Thanks for watching.